latest official count of over 99.8% of ballots in Peru's presidential elections shows progressive candidate Pedro Castillo ahead of right-winger Keiko Fujimori with 50.19% of the votes. They're separated by a difference of about 67,000 votes. Venezuela hosted Wednesday an international academic video conference on unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States and its allies against countries with independent policies. A United Nations human rights expert warned of mass deaths from starvation, disease and exposure in eastern Myanmar after the military forced tens of thousands of people to flee their homes in Kayah state. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Peru, where Pedro Castillo has maintained the lead in the presidential runoff polls held last Sunday. According to the latest figures from Peru's electoral body, the official count of almost 100% of the vote suggests he's beaten far-right rival Keiko Fujimori by a narrow margin of less than a percentage point. The difference between Castillo and Fujimori now stands at just over 67,000 ballots. On Tuesday evening, Castillo briefly addressed hundreds of supporters who've been gathering on a permanent basis in front of his Free Peru party headquarters in Lima, awaiting the final results. Meanwhile, the far-right candidate Keiko Fujimori continued denouncing episodes of fraud and hinting she might demand a repeat of the polls. Fujimori, daughter of former dictator Alberto Fujimori, is facing charges for corruption, for which she spent 15 months in prison and was released on bail in May last year. All international observer missions have denied any insignificant irregularities witnessed in the process. Mobilizations continue in Colombia as protesters rallied and marched towards the capital, Bogotá, from different locations for a massive peaceful rally. The move was made to coincide with the visit of a delegation from the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, which will look into evidence of violations by state security forces. The National Strike Committee is set to meet with the Commission's representatives to expose the atrocities committed by police, military forces and armed gangs against peaceful demonstrators. Over 60 murders have been registered. The collective of trade union, indigenous, rural, student and cultural organisations, among many other platforms, called the mobilisation to press the government to sign a pre-agreement to guarantee the right to social protest and ensure progress in negotiations on the strike's demands.
Today, here, we have made the distinction of the road blockade that we have had, but we are still heading to Bogotá to take Bogotá. It will be a peaceful occupation, as we have demonstrated in the north of Santander. In the case of the north of Santander today, in comparison with other departments, we are victorious because here in the north of Santander, the mobilization and strike has been calm because we have had no injuries. We have had no confrontation. We have had no death that goes under the behavior of the farmers, of the people that today we march in the street, of those who were part of the strike committee of the north of Santander. Stop to march, long live the Catatumbo.
Beatriz Cano was an indigenous leader in Cauca, Colombia. She was part of a peaceful demonstration when an armed gang showed up and fired at random. She died this week. People gathered on Tuesday at the Bicentennial Park in Medellin to pay tribute to Cano and all those who've fallen in Colombia's struggle for dignity. They demanded, once again, a halt to state violence against its own people. On June 4th, in the Lourdes neighbourhood of Cauca municipality, armed individuals arrived in a pickup truck and opened fire with rifles against Cano and a group of indigenous people. 2 police officers also died at the scene. Badly wounded in the attack, Cano died on June 7th. The protesters also honoured Ana Fabricia Cordova, a community leader in Medellin, who was murdered under similar circumstances on the same date back in 2011. On Tuesday, a large group of soccer fans was attacked by police forces in the vicinity of the Metropolitan Stadium in the city of Barranquilla shortly before the match between Colombia and Argentina for the World Cup Qatar 2022. Police officers threw tear gas and stun grenades at fans who displayed signs and chanted slogans like "I love football, but I love my country more," or "Without peace, there is no football." Non-governmental groups reported at least 46 arrests. The fans accuse the government of using the country's most popular game to divert attention from the social crisis, the ongoing national strike and the brutal repression of protests by security forces. All Grenadians should go get vaccinated as soon as possible, Prime Minister of Grenada, Keith Mitchell, said Wednesday at a press conference.
And in that sense, therefore, the emphasis has to be on vaccination, and that our duty as a country to encourage each and every one of us to vaccinate and get your 2 doses so that we can get back to our normal activities. In that sense, therefore, I want to report from the information that I was given yesterday that there are about 18,200 persons in our country that has received the first dose of COVID-19 AstraZeneca vaccine, and 9,200 persons are fully vaccinated.
And Prime Minister Mitchell said his government is prepared to provide financial aid and loans to people in need to compensate for losses and stimulate growth.
In that sense, therefore, we have been able to negotiate with the Caribbean Development Bank and the International Development Bank. The facility will be through the Caribbean Development Bank with very soft loan of $8.95 million US, which works out approximately to about $24 million. That initiative to help the marginalized persons and persons who have affected the most. And therefore the Ministry of Finance has been working with the Ministry of Social Development and also engaging some of our social partners in the whole question of the areas and the persons that could be supported with that initiative that we are embarking on.
In Bolivia, a failed opposition attempt to crush the interior minister in Congress ended up in a fistfight. This is what happened when extreme right parliamentarians failed in their attempt to grill Interior Minister Eduardo de Castillo on his role in the arrest of former dictator Denis Áñez. The minister counter-interpellated his accusers on the overthrowing of President Evo Morales in late 2019 and the crimes against humanity committed by the regime thereafter. Áñez is currently in jail, and her Interior Minister, Arturo Murillo, was arrested in the United States on corruption charges. El Salvador has become the first country in the world to legalize bitcoins as currency. The law was approved by a qualified majority in the Legislative Assembly of 62 out of 84 lawmakers. The legislation passed with the support of President Nayib Bukele's allies, despite minority opposition parties who had criticised the speed of the vote, refusing to back it. The executive hailed Bitcoin as the fastest growing way to transfer billions of dollars in remittances and to prevent millions from being lost to intermediaries. Remittances from Salvadorans working overseas represent a major chunk of the economy, equivalent to roughly 22% of gross domestic product. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Venezuela hosted this Wednesday an international academic video conference on unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States and its allies against countries with independent policies. The event, held worldwide by video conference, invited experts and senior officials from different governments to evaluate the impact of unilateral coercive measures on international law and the populations suffering from illegal sanctions. The speakers sought to activate mechanisms to counteract these measures and to move forward in the construction of a peaceful and multipolar world. Addressing the conference, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arias stressed the precise international regulations on sanctions.
It would be necessary to discuss and establish under which international regulations a state considers itself to have the power, the authority to punish, to sanction other states, We as civilized countries respect the United Nations Convention, and this convention clearly contemplates when and how coercive measures can be adopted, which are never unilateral and have a procedure for their application and evaluation, and are not a political or ideological will of a particular government in a particular country.
The United States continues its pressure on the sovereign government of Nicaragua by announcing new sanctions against 4 advisors to Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega in response to the arrest of opposition figures accused of acts that undermine the country's independence, sovereignty and self-determination. The latest individuals to be sanctioned by the US State Department include the President of the Central Bank of Nicaragua, a Brigadier General of the Nicaraguan Army, a member of Nicaragua's Electoral Commission and the Chairwoman of the Creative Economy Commission. The imposition of sanctions in Nicaragua are part of the destabilization project that began with a coup attempt in 2018. This includes an opposition sector that calls for such measures from the US and seeks to create a difficult climate that includes violence, political chaos and economic boycotts in order to undermine the holding of the elections scheduled for November 2021. The United States' new Innovation and Competition Act is full of prejudice and Cold War mentality, China's National People's Congress stated Wednesday. The announcement came after the US Senate on Tuesday approved a sweeping package of legislation intended to boost the country's ability to compete with Chinese technologies. The bill must now go to the lower house for approval. Besides heavy subsidies for research and development, the legislation requires that the iron, steel, manufactured products and construction materials used in federally funded infrastructure projects are produced in the United States. The Chinese authorities pointed out that the bill attempts to maintain the US global hegemony by exaggerating the so-called China threat. It also interferes in China's internal affairs under the pretext of human rights and religion. On Wednesday, US President Joe Biden arrived in the United Kingdom for the first stop of a European tour and the G7 summit, during which he will meet his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Biden is set to have a one-to-one meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Thursday, as the two seek to shore up the so-called special relationship in the wake of Brexit. The 8-day trip will conclude in Switzerland, where Biden will meet with Putin in the midst of the tensions between Moscow and Kiev, as well as the ongoing US attacks and sanctions on Russia. Before departing, Biden said the trip would demonstrate the strength of the transatlantic alliance and focus on making clear to Putin and China that Europe and the United States are tight. In Moscow, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Wednesday that Russia does not expect any major breakthroughs in the upcoming summit between President Vladimir Putin and his US counterpart Joe Biden in Geneva later this month.
No inflated expectations or illusions that there will be any breakthroughs at the Geneva summit, but there is an objective, a need to exchange views at the highest level about the threats that Russia and the United States see as two of the largest nuclear powers on the world stage. The very fact of talks between the two leaders of the leading nuclear powers is undoubtedly important, and we wholeheartedly support such an initiative from our US partners. We are interested in positive outcomes from the summit, but as it said, you need two to tango. If someone is breakdancing, it becomes more difficult.
The European Commission demanded concrete commitments by the United States towards ending transatlantic trade tensions as US President Joe Biden began his official tour of Europe on Wednesday, starting in the UK.
To make a decisive progress to resolve our bilateral disputes on aircraft and the US Section 232 measures on steel and aluminium. On the latter, we send a clear signal to the US on our willingness to solve this issue in a fair and balanced way by suspending the automatic doubling of our legitimate countermeasures. It is now for the US to walk the talk.
This Wednesday, the European Parliament reported that EU citizens and third country nationals living in the EU will be able to move between the bloc's countries with the EU Digital COVID Certificate. The document will be issued for free by national authorities and will be available either in digital format or on paper with a QR code. A total of 546 members of Parliament voted in favour of the document, 93 opposed, and 51 abstained from validating a mechanism that will be in place for 12 months as of July 1st. The certificate will certify whether a person has been vaccinated with a European Medicines Agency approved vaccine or recently received a negative test result or has recovered from the infection. This Wednesday, France and Belgium further relaxed their COVID-19 restrictions as cases fall and vaccinations rise, giving hope of a return to normal life. With the easing of the curfew in France, people will be able to dine indoors and stay out until 11 p.m. for the first time in months. The new measures also saw gyms reopen their doors to eager fitness fans. According to French authorities, if the situation continues to improve, the overnight curfew will be dropped entirely on June 30th. Likewise, Belgium also relaxed restrictions allowing cafes and restaurants to serve indoors, while mask-wearing rules were also eased in Brussels. Also announced were longer operating hours for businesses and easing of restrictions on sports venues and cinemas. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Wednesday, United Nations human rights expert warned of mass deaths from starvation, disease and exposure in eastern Myanmar after the military forced tens of thousands of people to flee their homes in Kayah state. In a statement, Tom Andrews, the UN Special Rapporteur for Myanmar, called for urgent international action, stating that attacks by the military were threatening the lives of many thousands of men, women and children. The plea came hours after the UN office in the country said the violence in Kayah had displaced an estimated 100,000 people who are now seeking safety in forests, host communities and southern parts of neighbouring Shan state. The executive also said that those fleeing and those in locations affected by the bombing and artillery fire were in dire need of food, water, shelter, fuel and access to healthcare. On Wednesday, heavy monsoon rains lashed India, specifically in the country's largest city, Mumbai. The city's seen heavy rainfall in the last 24 hours, disrupting life in the country's financial capital. Many parts of Mumbai were flooded and some train services cancelled as a result of the rain. According to climate experts, the southwest monsoon arrived 2 days ahead of its scheduled date. India had been hard hit by hurricanes and other storms prior to the arrival of the rains, which have impeded the vaccination process as the country battles the second wave of COVID-19.
It has been raining a lot in Mumbai. Today, the harbour railway line has been shut down, though the situation here is a little better. Many places like Sion and Kerala have been heavily waterlogged. The rainwater does not flow out easily from my building. Whenever there are heavy rains or high tide, the rain gets waterlogged everywhere and our houses get flooded.
Several areas in Ethiopia's embattled Tigray region remain inaccessible. Thousands are estimated to have been killed in the war launched by the Ethiopian government against the Tigray People's Liberation Front that has sent a third of the northern region's 6 million people fleeing. Spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, Stefan Dujarric, said on Wednesday that incidents of denial of humanitarian movement, interrogation, assault and detention of humanitarian workers at military checkpoints continue to be reported in the region. UN officials say famine is imminent in Tigray and in the country's north, warning there's a risk that hundreds of thousands of people will die. The exact number of civilians killed during the conflict is yet to be known. In Afghanistan, masked gunmen killed 10 people working for the Halo Trust mine-clearing organisation in the northern part of the country, the Interior Ministry reported on Wednesday. The ministry blamed the Taliban for the latest attack in an already violence-racked country. A Taliban spokesman denied the movement's involvement in any way. Halo Trust, a British contractor, informed that during the attack, 16 people, all of them staff members, were wounded. Fierce fighting has been seen in recent months with near-daily battles between the Taliban and government forces in several districts. The violence has surged across the country since May 1st, when the US military began its final troop withdrawal amid a deadlock in peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. The Israeli-annexed Golan Heights is part of the Syrian Arab territory based on international legitimacy, Syria's foreign ministry stressed on Wednesday, reacting to recent statements by the United States Secretary of State. Antony Blinken supported Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights since 1967, but stopped short of endorsing the annexation. Syria's foreign ministry said Blinken's statements are part of Washington's continuous support of Israeli aggression against its neighbours in flagrant violation of international law and the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Syria will continue its legitimate struggle to recover the occupied lands in the Golan, the foreign ministry said. On Tuesday, a delegation of the Economic Community of West African States, the United Nations mission in Mali, and other international delegates met the president of the new Malian transitional government, Assimi Goïta, to mediate a transition towards elections in the country. The Economic Community of West African States has called for a new civilian prime minister to be nominated immediately and demanded the formation of a new inclusive government. Goïta was sworn in Monday as president of the transitional government, solidifying his grip on power after carrying out his second coup in 9 months. The inauguration ceremony in the capital Bamako came as Mali faces increasing isolation from the international community. The African Union has suspended Mali's membership, and France has temporarily suspended its joint military operations with the Malian military to exert pressure on Goïta to step aside. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram, plus you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.